Why did 170 billion magically disappear?
And if instead of one, this was a methodical, almost surgical withdrawal directly connected to the beating heart of the American economy? In this video, we will explore how China has subtly reconfigured its investments, altered its alliances, and shifted its levels of influence, quietly reshaping the global economic landscape. Let's talk about Boeing. Supply chains freezing, trade corridors shifting, and Chinese factories reappearing elsewhere. It's not a collapse, it's a strategy. And the implications are much deeper than we imagine. It was not a disappearance, but a strategic retreat. Nearly $170 billion of Chinese investment has not been lost. They were withdrawn voluntarily, as if unplugging an essential plug in the American economy. One day, the capital came in. The next day, orders to Boeing were evaporating, industrial projects were put on hold, and supply chains were creaking, as if they were running on an emergency system. Wall Street wavered. Washington hesitated, but China had already changed course. It redirected its funds to Mexico, Serbia, and Southeast Asia, tracing new economic corridors while the rest of the world. He was looking elsewhere. It wasn't just a pause. In just 3 years, Chinese investments in the United States plunged from $46.5 billion in 2016 to less than $1.9 billion in 2024, according to Rhodium Group. It's not passive decline but voluntary restructuring. Bank of China ceased financing real estate projects in New York or Chicago. Meanwhile, companies like Citi or FireZen were quietly withdrawing from Ohio's industrial zones. Or from Nevada? According to Cushman and Wakefield buyers, Chinese now represented only a tiny fraction of commercial real estate transactions in the United States in early 2025, compared to nearly 10% 10 years more. Early is not one immobilization of capital, but a silent and precise withdrawal while the cameras remained focused on the conflicts. Trade or customs duties flows. Slowly but surely, financiers were reorienting. Investment announcements gave way to project abandonments. And even the supports. Chinese companies to American tech incubators like Plug and Play have disappeared, but the real question is not just why this withdrawal happened.
Is that what China is building instead?
The Sino-American economic relationship has not only been cooled, she has been recalibrated with one precision, surgical, to understand the magnitude of this change. It is enough to observe a name, Boeing, because this aeronautics giant is not just a supplier. It is an emblem of U.S. industrial dominance. At the end of 2023, the value of backlog orders for Boeing in China reached nearly $14 billion. According to Bloomberg, a few months later, this order book had disintegrated. In March 2025. The Chinese Civil Aviation Administration, the CAAC, stopped new deliveries of 737 MAX due to deteriorating diplomatic relations. Between Beijing and Washington, Cirium's device tracking data is irrevocable. In April alone, 6 737 MAX planes finalized for China were rerouted to storage areas in Victorville, California. But the impact doesn't stop at the landing strips. The supplier Arconi, specialized in the aerospace titanium, is of which 12% turnover came from Boeing China, recorded a manga earning of $115 million in the first quarter of 2025. This Chinese gesture was not a simple act of caution, but a strong and targeted message that by deviating from Boeing, Beijing was not just cutting a contract, it was marking a strategic point. The idea was clear: if the number one symbol of American exports can be set aside, then no company is immune. And this was only the first maneuver in a much larger game. As of 2022, more than $31 billion in manufacturing projects of Chinese origin have been redeployed to Mexico. And that's no coincidence. Shenzhen-based Hisense started construction of a $260 million home appliance factory in Nuevo León in January 2024. Jack Motors has partnered with Solar and Vert to produce electric cars in the state. De Hidalgo, Mexico. Because producing under the frame of the agreement, USMCA replacing NAFTA? These firms have free access to the US market while avoiding restrictions targeting imports directly from China. According to a Bloomberg intelligence report published in May 2025, 37% of Chinese companies in the process of relocating are now choosing North America.
South Asia is one
complete turnaround by report to the situation just 2 years ago. But this dynamic did not go unnoticed at the White House. On April 10th, President Trump signed it. Executive Order 1288, imposing a 25% tax on Mexican products non-compliant with the U.S. agreement. As an immediate result, 28 Chinese projects located in Mexico were subjected to re-evaluation. In the process, logistics group Maersk saw a 26% increase in customs inspections at the border in May, causing on average more than 3 days of delay on deliveries. These are not fortuitous obstacles, they are deliberately created friction zones. And in a logistics network, friction doesn't wait to make headlines to get expensive. It eats margins, slows flows, and silently changes the geography of trade. While Chinese flows are skillfully redeploying, Canada is playing a very different card, that of strategic natural resources. Canadian authorities have announced nearly $19 billion in projects related to critical minerals lithium, cobalt, and rare earths under development in the second quarter of 2025. The province of Quebec alone accounts for more than 40% of North American lithium production projections, making it a key link in the Western electric vehicle supply chain. But this opening towards Lonst was accompanied by an assumed closure towards China. As of 2022, Ottawa forced 3 Chinese companies, notably Zhang and Chongqing, to sell their Canadian mining assets. Since then, Canada's policy on critical resources has been clear: zero tolerance towards China. In response, the Pentagon signed a $375 billion contract with Neo Performance Materials, guaranteeing a supply of rare earth magnets without going through Chinese channels. But this ambitious plan is already facing local resistance. In June, 2 major lithium mining projects were suspended following lawsuits by indigenous groups. Canada may well become a pillar of Western supply, but to do so, it will have to reconcile strategic security with the sovereignty of indigenous peoples. Because by blocking access to China, it also opens new internal lines of tension. On the American side, the desire for industrial reconquest is displayed. More, execution remains shaky. Iconic projects like Sotel's $20 billion semiconductor campus in Arizona, where Ford's $3.5 billion battery plant in Michigan symbolize this return of industry. But according to the McKinsey 2025 report, less than 18% of industrial capacity. Promised to the States? The U.S. is now operational. Majority of these plants won't be ready until post-2027. Meanwhile, supply tensions persist. Bloomberg warns of shortages of lithium hydroxide, an essential component of batteries, which is causing chain delays in the manufacturing of electric vehicles. Tesla, for example, has already pushed back its production targets 3 times this year, despite the $52 billion of the CHIPS Act passed in 2022. Less than 40% of the funds were actually released in May 2025, according to Government Accountability Office audits. Regulatory delays, administrative delays, operating permit problems, there are multiple obstacles. Former Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo summed it up perfectly. Relocation is not a sprint, it's a marathon, and we're already behind. And while America slowly builds its new infrastructure, manufacturers must continue to operate blindly between rising costs and persistent dependencies. The problem? It's not just money. It's time. American imports saw prices jump 7.2% year-on-year in April 2025. Direct consequences: new tariff increases on components from Mexico, Canada, and displaced Chinese suppliers. Bureau of Labor Statistics reports this leads to an average $1,600 increase on vehicle prices. General Motors and Stellantis feel the impact. Already the price? $4.1 billion and $2.7 billion in additional costs, respectively. In the first quarter, inflation seemed to be under control. Abruptly resumed. In May, the Consumer Price Index rose 0.6%, worst since July 2023. And these shocks extend beyond big groups. In rural Ohio, an industrial subcontractor with 500 employees recently filed for bankruptcy, unable to find alternative suppliers outside China, an increasingly common scenario in Western industrial states. Costs don't stop at company balance sheets. They land in your lockers, your bills, your rents, and despite all that, the most complex financial decisions are still ahead.
While the United States is trying to re-industrialize at full speed, China is advancing its pieces internationally, redeploying its investments with strategic precision. In just 12 months, it has stepped up the construction of industrial infrastructure in Southeast Asia, the Middle East, Eastern Europe, and even South America, Indonesia, Vietnam, and Malaysia. Nearly 9 billion in agreements have been signed in the areas of transport, energy, and telecommunications. The Asian Investment Bank. Une infrastructure. In Serbia, Huawei opened a 5G equipment factory near Belgrade in March. In Hungary, China Railway Corporation has teamed up with the state-owned company M2V to manufacture electric trains. But the most notable move came in May, when the China Development Bank approved a $1.2 billion loan to develop the port of Marcona in Peru. The objective is to establish a new export corridor for rare earths, not intended for Western markets. It doesn't. These are not opportunistic investments, but structural decisions. China is building an economic geography, parallel, designed not only to diversify its risks, but above all to reduce American influence on the roads.
Key commercials.
The Economist, Alicia Garcia.
Herrero summed it up in the Financial Times. Ella.
China isn't satisfied.
To react to sanctions, she
creates an autonomous architecture. The message is clear. Chinese capital does not return to the country. It is recycled at scale.
World to avoid having to repatriate it one day.
But this new economic geopolitics shatters illusions.
Americans on the relocation, for instance.
Example of the semiconductor factory
Of Intel in Arizona or that of battery.
Ford response.
Michigan, they are perceived as showcases of American industrial renewal, but in reality, they are not yet operational and their supply chains remain largely dependent on foreign components.
According to the
Bank Supply Chain Index 2025, more than 58% of the parts used in the new factories relocated to the United States still come from China. The example of BYD is revealing its automobile factory project in Coahuila,
in Mexico,
was suspended not for lack of interest, but because of the U.S. elections due to the presence of Chinese chips integrated into electric propulsion systems. Even the flagship lithium extraction project in the Mexican state of Sonora, presented as a model of strategic autonomy, still relies on refining technology provided by Chinese groups, which immediately triggered an alert in Washington. In response, Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum toughened the tone, tightening controls on foreign investment. But on the ground, control mechanisms are still too disparate to really block Chinese influence. Meanwhile, technological tensions are accelerating. In April, the U.S. Treasury proposed severely limiting outbound investment into sensitive Chinese sectors, such as artificial intelligence or quantum computing. This proposal is supported by the Counterintelligence Center, which now identifies 29 Chinese companies as highly strategic for Beijing's civil-military merger. The bill would ban all U.S. funding in areas identified as crucial by China, including defense, communications, and automation. Beyond simple finance, a global restructuring of innovation channels. Consequences felt. Joint scientific publications between the US and China fell 38% since 2021. Reuters Salon and National Science Foundation report enrollment of Chinese doctoral students in US technology fields dropped 22% in 2024. Cisco has begun reviewing all of its software security protocols to comply with the new export rules. NVIDIA, for its part, estimates that these restrictions could cut 25% of its expected growth in Southeast Asia. We don't talk.
More here from
Cold War nostalgia? Global firewall.
Active in Time.
Real. The Wall Street Journal is now talking about a de facto cutting of global innovation, and here's the final question. Is this firewall temporary, or is it a point of no return? The Mexican industrial boom may give the illusion of an American strategic victory, but in reality, local companies are still heavily dependent on Chinese suppliers, as Wilson Center economist Denkenwood points out. Ultimately, relocation doesn't really protect, it masks vulnerability behind a new facade, which we do.
Let's observe here. Is not a simple evolution of trade routes, but a silent rewriting of the global balance. China does not slam the door, it redesigns architecture, and while the US is still looking for a way out, the real battlefield may have already shifted. Morsi took the time to follow this analysis to the end. If you found this information useful, clear, or simply enlightening in an increasingly complex economic world, don't forget to like the video,
Subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell so you don't miss anything from the next episodes. More videos like this are coming soon. Strategic decryptions, unfiltered economic analyses, and perspectives that you don't know. You won't find them in them. Traditional media. See you very soon, and above all, stay curious.